Пане Сергію, вітаємо вас на другому етапі.
So, Serhii, welcome at the second stage of the selection for the HQCJ of Ukraine. At the interview stage, the interview is conducted by the full composition of the selection commission, which these are Tadza Shachny, Ivan Mishchenko, Serhii Verlanov, Ivan Mezentsev, Robert Brugheisen, and Stephen Markman. The rapporteurs at your interview are Tadza Shachny and Serhii Verlanov. Even so happens that our interview is interrupted for some technical reasons, we will definitely reach you and reschedule it for some other day and some other time, but we hope very much that this will not happen. During the interview, the commissioners will ask you questions, and the request is to give concise, clear answers to the core of the matter, and the commissioners may limit the time of your answer. Before the beginning of the interview, you will have a chance to present yourself and to tell about your motivation for applying for this competition and about your ideas about the functioning of the new HQCJ, maybe some other things, some other ideas about the judiciary. So with this, let me give the floor to my colleagues, Serhii and Tad. You're welcome.
Yes, good day, Mr. Hrabar. My name is Ted Zarzechny. I'm a member of the Selection Commission. I will acquaint some of our viewers with a little bit of your personal circumstances and history. I understand that you are 42 years of age and that you had basically two occupations. You were a prosecutor, a deputy head of department, senior prosecutor, and again head of the department in the Melnitsky prosecution office. And then you moved in 2015 to Brovary Interdistrict Prosecutor's Office. You were a prosecutor and head of the Chernobyl department of the local prosecutor's office. And from 2016 until the present time, you are a senior detective with the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. We call that NABU, of course. You are married, sir, with two children. With that, I will turn the microphone over to you, and you can provide us with any further personal details that you think will assist us, and as well, perhaps any indication or further indication of your motivation for applying to be a member of the High Qualification Commission of Judges of Ukraine. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. So, good morning, dear commissioners. First of all, let me indicate that I'm motivated to participate in the selection by the fact that this is a perfect opportunity to join in something important. I've been striving for a long period of time to join in the process of development of some state institutions. I've got some experience of working in the institution which has been established following absolutely new principles and approaches, and that's why I think that I have got some experience and some achievements and some ideas to further use them in my work. My professional career as a prosecutor and detective involves working with judges. That's why I know what the problems of the judiciary are and what the peculiarities of the work of the judiciary in courts are, and I know what to direct my effort at. I'm happy and lucky because I think that I have met a lot of highly professional and competent judges, and it was a pleasure to work with them, to find some common language with them, and to figure out what the solutions to a certain problem could be. And over the period of work in the local prosecution, where I worked as the prosecutor, I was in charge of the prosecution in different cases, of different case types, and I didn't have any acquittals over that period of time. Well, of course, this is not a positive factor for the society, but it's a positive factor for me. I'm sure that Ukraine can apply absolutely different principles and approaches in the work of different entities. But this depends on the will of the management and on the availability of people of integrity who develop the policy of the institutions in general and the staff policy within a specific branch of power. I also think that proper motivation is a very important thing. People should be motivated to introduce changes, and it's important to introduce new progressive methods into the work of this or that institution. In particular, from my own experience, I can tell that positive things are the policies of the monitoring of the way of living. This is the policy exercised by NABU. Also, integrity checks, regular polygraph testing, and advanced training, which should also be happening on a systemic basis and should be grounded on some objective criteria. At the same time, I also think that we should approach adaptation of some mechanisms with due account of psychological aspects, historical experience, and the practice of development of specific mechanisms in other countries, in particular in the developed democratic countries. From my own experience, I can tell you that while working as the head of Chernobyl Department of Local Prosecution Office, I was a prosecutor in one of the cases related to illegal enrichment in Kiev region, and the prosecutor's office, on the basis of my report, documented this illegal enrichment. But I was frustrated about the fact that several times I went to the court hearings in this case, which, as for me, was not a difficult case. Everything was simple, everything was clear, but somehow we have delays in this process. But, you know, it was easy to register all procedural decisions. It was easy to collect the evidence. But in spite of that, this court case has been urgent for some 3 or 4 times, and it was a surprise for me. Working since 2016 in the Anti-Corruption Bureau, still on the 28th, on the 29th of December last year, I read great news in the field of anti-corruption that there has been a sentence to a person, to the head of the Chernobyl Department of Local Prosecution. So that is already the fourth round of this case hearing. There is a delay in that very simple case. But in most cases, the judges I have worked with, and well, these were the judges with whom we always found some common understanding in many aspects. Thank you for attention.
Yes, thank you for that background, Mr. Hrabar. We'll now turn the matter over to questions that the members of the Selection Commission may have with respect to your circumstances and further your motivation. And so I will begin, Mr. Hrabar. My co-reporter is Judge Verlanov, and I will turn to him shortly. It's very clear from my reading of your information, together with the biography that you have provided in your motivation letter, that the entire concentration of your legal career has been in the area of prosecution and law enforcement. The work of the High Qualification Commission, as you may be aware, very much involves many more disciplines than simply the assessment of candidates to serve in courts of criminal jurisdiction. They serve in courts of commercial jurisdiction, economic courts, administrative cases, family law cases, and generally speaking, civil cases. I do not see anything that suggests that you have experience as a lawyer, professional experience, with respect to any of those areas. So I ask you this question. Considering the narrow focus of your professional career, how do you feel that you will be able to assess judge candidates for position in first instance courts or courts of appeal where they are required to consider a broad range of legal issues and cases?
Thank you for the question. The position I'm holding now is partially also related to assessment and evaluation of the candidates who are to be hired by the NABU and who are willing to prove their integrity in particular. Since, as I've already mentioned, I have also worked with polygraph testing since 2016, and I often work with candidates for the NABU stuff. And as a result, I think that I can assess and evaluate people because a polygraph tester is in a way a psychologist and a person who should establish some contact with the candidate and find out as much information about the skills of the candidate and the opportunities this candidate has as possible. We also try to check for some critical aspects of integrity in the sense that there is not always the opportunity to prove integrity through some objective factors. Sometimes only the candidate himself can really tell whether this happened that way or whether this happened in any other way. So using polygraph and using these critical skills, psychological skills, we have to check this information. And I think that in spite of the fact that I'm really focusing on some narrow field of activity within the Anti-Corruption Bureau, I think that I still have a lot of professional skills in terms of evaluation of people and provision of qualified opinions and qualified assessment on this or that aspect of a candidate's activity.
Well, as you are aware, Mr. Hrabar, that is half, perhaps more, but it is approximately or considered, in theory, half of the work of the High Qualification Commission. A good part of the other work is the assessment of the professional competence of candidates to serve on the various courts and administer justice in all areas of human and legal activity. If one assumes for the moment that integrity, as you have quite properly referred to it, will be, and your experience with it, will be of value, what do you say about your ability and lack of experience in assessing the professional competence of judges for work in the various courts of Ukraine?
Well, first of all, let me mention that I'm a lawyer and I'm a professional, and in my professional activity, I work with judges of both appellate and cassation courts and trial courts. And I've been preparing documents and I've been preparing some opinions. I know the work of judges from the inside. I know what their view of different aspects of cases is. And my knowledge is not limited to criminal proceedings only or the aspects of the prosecutor's office activity, which were included into my functional duties. Because even while holding this selection for the Bureau or for other institutions, when this competition was held, I always had to pass comprehensive exams, which included different fields of law. That's why I can confirm I confirmed through those selection processes my professional competence in different fields of knowledge in the law. I participated in the selection for the head of local prosecutor's office in December 2015, and I passed all the stages. But on the basis of the results of the interview, which lasted only for 5 minutes, unlike all other candidates for some reason, the decision was passed that I am not a decent candidate for this position.
There are many contributors that the High Qualification Commission has to assist it in its work. You, of course, NABU was an important contributor, and I might mention the same thing is true of our selection commission. So you have NABU, NACP, you have civil society, you have, very importantly, the National School of Judges. Now, have you ever participated in any of the educational programs of the National School of Judges, either as a presenter or as a student or as a mentor for young candidate judges? So have you had any involvement with the National School?
Thank you for the question. I was not involved directly in the work of the National School of Judges of Ukraine, but I know the teachers, the lecturers of that school who used to work there or who work there now, and I've had some communication with them on some issues related to training of judges and on the programs. We have had some communication at the level of professionals, but one of my first trips abroad was a trip to Germany in 2016, and there we had a study tour, and we visited a small town, Ostrava, and we visited the School of Judges there and got acquainted with the aspects and the approaches they are applying for the training and advanced training of incumbent judges in Germany. And when I got acquainted with those approaches, I was really impressed because a lot of the things that we could see in 2016 have already been introduced by the National School of Judges of Ukraine. Back then, it was rather surprising for us that these were not lectures, but this was more like mentoring and discussion of different problem issues with judges of different instances. This was discussion of some practical issues, some aspects of theory, and the atmosphere, the environment was absolutely different. So I was surprised that our School of Judges has always started applying these approaches and practices.
Have you had any involvement, Mr. Hrabar, with any civil society organizations or any legal professional organizations in the course of your legal career?
No, I have never been involved in the work of such organizations because my professional activity is sometimes related to assessment of some candidates, and this should be objective assessment. What do I mean? I mean that over the recent months, for example, since we have been engaged in the activities aimed at reinforcement of the defense capacity of the state, I had to work with court staff and judges with polygraph testing. And I did not participate in any organizations that could provide me any additional information because I wanted my assessment to be objective. And I was surprised that there are some judges in the territories that used to be under occupation or that are frontier territories, who hesitated over a period of time, and they were kind of looking where it would be more beneficial for them to work, with whom, with what side. So we did some testing of the court staff, and I saw that the level of conscience and responsibility of court staff in those territories was higher. They were hiding servers from their courts with court decisions in their houses. They were hiding from the enemy those servers, in spite of the fact that there were some inspections and examinations.
My last question is this, Mr. Hrabar. Have you ever had occasion to have any contact with the High Qualification Commission of Judges of Ukraine in the past? I don't see any indication that you have made any applications yourself for a judicial position, for example, or have you had any contact with the High Qualification Commission of the past?
Thank you for the question. No, I did not have any contacts with the previous composition of the HQCJ. And actually, I'm not acquainted with any member of the HQCJ of that composition. I just know about the results of their work. In particular, I know about this selection to the Supreme Court and High Anti-Corruption Court. And as far as the applications for judicial positions are concerned, for any selection processes are concerned, I really did not apply, and I was not involved in the work of the HQCJ in any format.
All right, thank you. I'm going to now invite my colleague, Judge Verlanov, to ask any questions he may have of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Good morning, Serhii. Let me clarify the following with you. You have explained to us right now that you're a polygraph tester. You have been dealing with polygraph testing since 2016. You work in NABU. In your motivation letter, you indicate that very effective methods for monitoring of the way of living and checking integrity are the methods of polygraph. Could you please tell us in what countries they are using polygraph testing during the procedure of selection and appointment of judges? Do you have this information at hand? There is some experience of using polygraph, but I did not study this experience in this field. We mostly dealt with polygraph testing in the field of law enforcement, and that's the issue we studied. In particular, in many civilized countries like the US and Great Britain, polygraph is widely used for regular inspections in order to identify the level of integrity of staff. You mean of law enforcement bodies? Yes, law enforcement bodies. And as far as the appointment of judges is concerned, you don't know in what countries this experience is applicable. Yes, I don't have this information, but I think that this experience would be useful, and let me explain why I think so. That's because there may be some situations when it's quite difficult to confirm or to refute a certain piece of information. Suppose, and it's just an example from my own experience and from what we faced in our activity. Suppose there are some accusations in relation to a certain staff member, and the claims are that he committed some wrongful actions, and there is only one witness, the person who is related to such actions. It's very difficult to prove anything. And many a time in such situations, we have had cases when staff members initiated this polygraph testing in relation to these claims and accusations that were raised against them. And while passing this polygraph testing, they confirmed that they were wrongfully accused, and in that way they got an opportunity to claim in public that this was not true and that they could confirm the result by the results of polygraph testing. But if these people of the opposite side were asked to undergo this polygraph testing, they refused in all the cases. Yes, but we are not talking about any accusations now, right? About refuting or proving something. We are talking about assessment and selection of judges. Yes, I agree. In this respect, there also may be some situations when you cannot always collect all the information, comprehensive information about a person, about income, about integrity, and about wrongful, illegal actions. So I think it would be useful to give an opportunity to a person to undergo this polygraph testing in order to confirm integrity if the person physically cannot collect all the data and confirm his or her integrity, while claiming that he or she has nothing to do with certain wrongful actions and that certain income and property was obtained illegally. There may be different situations, and there should be just an opportunity provided to this person, because I think that this is quite an effective method. So it's like an additional mechanism for assessing following the integrity criteria, right? Right, as an additional mechanism. I don't mean that this should be the basic mechanism and that it should be applied in relation to all the candidates. Just vice versa, it could be applicable only to the cases when we have some reasonable doubt and when there is additional need. That should not be the basic tool anyway. Thank you. Here is my next question, Serhii. As you have explained to us at the interview, you dedicated your professional life to work in the law enforcement bodies, prosecutor's office, and since the year 2016 in the newly established body NABU, and you are dealing with polygraph testing. Could you please explain to us what are the main factors that urged you to change your vector of activity in your professional life? And, you know, instead of going to a judicial position, you decided to apply for the body that makes assessment of judges. What are the main factors that urged you? What were the main incentives for you to choose this vector of change? Thank you for the question. And let me start with saying that, as I already mentioned, I participated in the selection for the position of the head of Hrabar local prosecutor's office, and that happened in 2015. I passed all the stages, but for the interview. As a result, I hoped back then that the prosecutors' bodies will always also have the changes that we expected, like increase in the number of staff members, increase in finance, local administration of finance, and this urged me to participate in that selection because I really hoped for changes. Unfortunately, the changes did not occur. And when I heard about the establishment of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and saw the first results of the selection process for NABU and the first results of the evaluation and their selection commission members, these were in particular the members of the Council of Public Control. And what I heard from the people who had already passed the selection, well, these all things encouraged me very much to participate in the selection for NABU. And that was actually also a change in my activity, because I was actually going to a lower position from if we treat it from the point of view of the law system. I used to be head of the department, and I became just a simple detective of NABU. But I was looking for the new direction of activity where the principles and the values I have would be confessed. This is integrity, decency, responsibility, accountability. And I also wanted to join in the process of development of this corporate culture. And that's what I actually did through submission of my documents for the position of the internal in control unit staff member. And let me repeat that there is not a single criminal proceeding where NABU staff members would have been sentenced. One of my colleagues has said this at one of the interviews. So this shows that we really have this corporate culture and we have integrity in place. It's not only about polygraph testing, it's about our daily work. For example, we have the so-called integrity testing and testing for the knowledge of professional ethics, and NABU staff have to pass this testing every year. And if you have to pass some testing, you open the codes once again, you look through the codes, and you have to perform practical assignments. And by the way, one of my suggestions concerning improvements in the work of the HQCJ would be related to the following. Probably it's necessary to develop the testing on integrity, where we could have either have some simulations, or we could take some real examples with the question and the certain number of answers, or an open question. And this could also give some results, some good results. This would be the result that can be checked. This is not just some abstract understanding that here is my understanding of integrity and here is his understanding of integrity. And one person has committed the action that which is more an act of integrity, and the other one is less an act of integrity. Thank you, Serhii, for your interesting suggestions. And let me now give the floor to Stephen. You're welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Judge Verlanov. And thank you very much, Mr. Hrabar, for participating in this competition today. You mentioned the United States when you were discussing the prevalence of polygraph testing, and you are correct, there's a very limited role in law enforcement, but it's a very limited role. And I believe my colleague, Judge Verlanov, is equally correct that it's not used in the judicial selection process at all. At least I've never heard of it being used in either the federal or the state judicial selection processes. Mr. Hrabar, of course, we passed you on to the second stage of our competition, and I think that's because the Commission thinks very highly of your qualifications and your professional accomplishments. I personally gave great weight to the fact that you spent 14 years as a prosecutor, and you established an excellent record in that realm. But that was, of course, 7 years ago now. I ask you this legal question because I, too, want to follow up on what my colleague, Judge Zarzechny, has asked you about your background. And this legal question is this: are you and your colleagues who are NABU detectives, are you engaged in the profession of law? That is, of course, the standard under our competition. I think it's Section 94 of the law, if I'm not incorrect. But that, to me, is the question, and I would direct it toward you as one who is learned in that law. Are you engaged in the profession of law?
Well, thank you for the question. Well, I think myself to be involved in the profession of law because, first of all, I work at draft documents. We give our recommendations and improvements on the improvement of the judiciary and amendments in the legislation. And among other things, I've also got involved in the development of the system EKIS, which is the electronic criminal proceedings system. And currently, this system is being integrated with the Unified Register of Pretrial Investigations. We are working at it because both prosecutors and investigators and judges should have direct access to digital documents in a specific criminal proceeding. this will improve the work of the judiciary, it will accelerate case hearing, and it will also improve the work of investigators and prosecutors. I've seen this experience in Germany, in the Czech Republic, and this is really a very effective procedure that helps. So this is what my involvement in the profession of law is. Also,
Okay. No, I don't doubt that you do things that are related to the law and things that are legal, but still you think, and I'm just asking a question, I'm not sure of the answer, but you think that you personally are engaged in the profession of the law. Is it a qualification of detectives such as yourself and Nabu that they have law degrees? It is?
yes.
Okay.
Well, as far as the values and principles of law are concerned, I always think that the judiciary should be independent and have some safeguards for its activity. And one of those safeguards, which is very effective for the Bureau, is financial guarantee. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said about the judiciary as such. The court staff members don't have proper funding, and courts and their premises are not provided with proper funding. So the only thing which is a financial safeguard is quite a good salary of judges, but not the staff members. I'm trying to fully get involved in the activity of courts, focusing on all possible aspects whenever I have a chance. For example, if I have a chance to participate in some court hearings or make some suggestions concerning legislative amendments, I always do this.
Detective Hrabar, let me ask you this question. You have a very interesting statement at the beginning of your motivation letter. You say, I have experience working in the structure from which, from the very beginning, follows absolutely different approaches than the state institutions having the post-Soviet trail. Now, are you talking about the judiciary as one of those Ukrainian institutions that has some element of the post-Soviet trail? And if you are you suggesting that that may be one of the things that's retarded its development in some respect?
Thank you for the question. I think that this post-Soviet style is available in all the entities, but in law enforcement bodies it's mostly manifested because we really have those outdated approaches. If we take the courts, the judiciary, I think that still changes have occurred there. And one of the changes is about the fact that the approaches have changed and that the bodies have been established to determine who should be a judge, who should not be a judge, which means that the judiciary is gradually stepping aside from the other branches of power. Because, you know, we used to have the committee of the Verkhovna Rada that was selecting judges. And now we have High Council of Justice and the High Qualification Commission of Judges of Ukraine. And these are the bodies through which different approaches and principles are being developed. On the other hand, I'm very happy about the fact that in spite of the fact that in Bureau, we have people with certain background. We are not saints. But when people get into a team which confesses the same approaches and the same principles, in particular in relation of integrity, this then predetermines the policy of all staff members. And in this respect, I also think that in courts we should develop this corporate internal culture, judicial culture, and approaches to what is an act of integrity, what is not. I also realized that at a certain stage, taken into account the fact that quite a number of judges were appointed long ago, and they still follow outdated approaches, and they will try even to influence new judges, asking them not to change those principles and those approaches. They will try to intervene. But nevertheless, we need to create some mechanisms in courts that would enable to quickly respond to such interference. For example, if all staff members of a certain court exerting pressure on a newly appointed judge, there should be mechanisms where this judge can anonymously at least inform about this situation, and there must be active mechanisms, effective mechanisms of responding, because so far as I know, the High Council of Justice doesn't have those mechanisms to respond to such claims. In some cases, even judges of the Anti-Corruption Court addressing our bureau for help or assistance in specific situations.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you think that there are a disproportionate number of the more experienced, the more senior judges in Ukraine who may have different and less reform-oriented perspectives than some of the less experienced and less senior judges. Am I characterizing you correctly, or is that an overly simplistic interpretation of what you've just said?
Thank you. I would say that you are right about the second aspect, that this is oversimplistic. Why? Because I have worked with judges who are experienced judges, and they still confess new values. They confess the value of integrity, of law, and they have the virtues which are really predetermining for the HQCJ for choosing the most decent candidates for judicial positions. That's why we cannot speak in general that all experienced judges are bad and are not practice-oriented, change-oriented. In different courts, we have different practices, but unfortunately, there are courts where the teams can influence newly appointed members. That's true.
So please just explain to me very quickly what you meant when you were distinguishing between some of the judges who'd been appointed to the court a considerably longer time ago. What were you intending to say about such judges? Because I wasn't very clear about that then.
What I meant was that experienced judges in some courts have built a certain system of internal corporate policy that is not always the culture of integrity. And they are trying to exert pressure on newly appointed judges, making them work within their context of integrity and their approaches to justice. So in such situations, there should be some mechanisms, and we should create such mechanisms to respond to those situations. And then this would allow judges, even probably following some anonymous nature, to inform about such facts, because this is not the practice which we have everywhere. This is not sustainable practice of all courts. This is the practice in some specific courts, and we should have effective mechanisms to respond to that. And the practice, of course, depends on the chief judge a lot.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting observation, and I appreciate you sharing it with us. Thank you very much, and let me ask my colleague, Mr. Broekhuizen, to join in the questioning now.
Good morning. Just that I understand exactly what you do within NABU. You describe yourself as a senior detective. Does that mean that you're a policeman? You have police possibilities and you can arrest people, and is that what you are?
Thank you for the question. I work as the investigator, which means that, among other things, I have to do pre-trial investigation in criminal cases, but well, there are a number of articles of criminal code I work in accordance with, and this refers to the crimes committed by the NABU detectives.
Okay, but you're some kind of a policeman, aren't you?
In a way, yes.
Yes. Okay. And do I understand that your work is especially internal control, which means, as I understand it, control of NABU employees to avoid that they do something wrong?
Yes, yes. But let me also tell you that as far as pre-trial investigations are concerned, that is just a part, an element of what we do in our daily work. And the mechanisms that I've already mentioned, like integrity check or monitoring of the way of living, polygraph testing, on-the-job investigations on certain facts. Well, this is a whole set of activities and measures that we take on a daily basis, and trial investigations are just an element of that.
I understand that, of course, that someone in your position would do those things. Have you ever investigated and prosecuted judges?
No. I haven't had any investigations in relation to judges, and I haven't heard any other internal procedures that would be related to judges or their activity. I haven't had this in my practice.
Normally, when you would do an investigation, a criminal investigation, you would report to a prosecutor, I guess. Is that not how it works?
That's the way it works. We do have the report that has to be submitted to the prosecutor. That's true.
Yeah, the prosecutor is not your boss, but he is responsible for the handling of the file and building the file up to sufficient proof. Is that how it works?
The prosecutor is my boss in case I deal with pre-trial investigation in a specific proceeding, and if he is appointed the procedural supervisor in that case, the procedural supervisor is a person who has quite a set of duties.
Yes, in your motivation letter, you say that you work, and you just said it, I think also in your introductory speech. Let me see. That you work together with judges a lot. But if I think about it as a former prosecutor, I would think that there should be a division between prosecution and courts. Courts and judges are to decide. Prosecution is to investigate and prosecute. So in what respect do you have all those contacts with those? Do you work together with those judges?
Thank you for the question. I worked with judges always in the context of supporting state prosecution or representing the interests of citizens in the state in courts. Depending on the position I had, I worked either with trial court judges or appellate court judges, and sometimes also cassation court judges, and I worked with them in relation to the decisions I was appealing.
Okay, but that was when you were a prosecutor.
Not only. Now, when I am a NABU detective, I also have to work with judges because some of my procedural decisions may be appealed. I have to advocate my point of view concerning some decisions passed in some proceedings. And of course, I have to go to court hearings and to communicate with judges.
But that means that you do not work with them together. They are sitting in a court and you come for a judgment. Is that correct to say?
Well, I do come to the court hearing, and I have to advocate my point of view. And I can tell you that while working in the prosecutor's office, of course, my communication with judges was closer because trial court judges more often tried to discuss certain problem issues arising in the proceedings. So I had more of communication with judges when we discussed some problem issues.
Yep. Okay, I understand that. I can see that, of course, that you have some knowledge that would be useful for the HQCJ. On the other side, this knowledge is, of course, available within NABU, where you work. And do you feel it's a good idea that the HQCJ would contain people who are in fact NABU people, while NABU is one of the most important institutions that will provide HQCJ with information? I would say, but I would say it's for you to give your opinion on this, that HQCJ should ask information that you compile, or people like you compile from NABU, and it is not a good idea that HQCJ starts investigating themselves, because they wouldn't have your powers. Or am I wrong?
Thank you for the question again. I think that you are now talking about specific functions and specific duties, but I would like to join the functions of the HQCJ in the part of their functions. I don't mean that I'm going to the HQCJ to just perform my duties which I performed in NABU and to use those skills of mine. I just want to use my experience and my skills, in particular skills of doing some psychological testing, and because I want to work as an HQCJ member, not NABU member.
Okay.
There.
Thank you. I will pass the floor to my colleague.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. I appreciate it. Доброго дня, пане Сергію. Я
Good morning, Serhii, and let me continue with with our communication. And I would like to start discussing with you some elements that, well, I can't say that they were a concern for the Commission, but they need to be discussed in public since these are property issues.
Ну, дійсно, було б неправильним вважати, що
It
працівник
would
системи
really
внутрішньої
be
безпеки
wrong
НАБУ
to
має
think
якісь
that
проблеми з
a NABU guy
майном.
may have any property issues. So far, and this doesn't mean still that you won't have any questions on that. Question number one, before you went to NABU and moved to Kyiv, for a period of time you rented an apartment with 35 square meters of area, so a small one. Later, Helena Hrabar bought the apartment, 44.7 square meters, and starting with 2017, you've been living with your family in this apartment. Please, if you could tell the Commission your relationship with Helena Hrabar and what are the grounds on which you're living in this apartment. Thank you for the question. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit coughing. So what I would like to explain is that Helena Hrabar is my mother, and at some period of time, when I rented an apartment during my first years of staying in Kyiv, I was using this apartment, but my friend who actually rented this apartment to me asked me to leave the premises rather quickly because he needed the apartment. So I had to address my parents, and the parents of my wife, and all the money I had back then, all the money they had back then was used to buy this car. So means that somehow you invested altogether into this apartment. Yes. And it was our decision to register this apartment for my mother. It was done with her consent, and I actually do not conceal this fact. all the more that my children are registered in that department. Yes, but you realize why I'm asking this question, because any free of charge use of an apartment evokes doubts as to whether the person who is doing this is not a title owner. And so you have explained that you have also invested into this apartment on specific terms. Here is the other question about the car you are using as the owner. This is Chevrolet Volt 2017, and you bought it on the 9th of October 2020. And the amount was 416,000 hryvnias. If we take it in the equivalent to the dollar at the official exchange rate as of that date, that is $14,700. Chevrolet Volt is not a frequent car, a US car for the domestic market of the US, and it's not popular. It's not widespread in Ukraine, and you bought it as a used car. Along with that, even now, in the market of Ukraine, we have 15 Chevrolet Volt cars of 2017 year of make, and the lowest price is 17.2, and the most expensive one of the same year of make is $22,500. Could you please explain what the circumstances of the acquisition of the car were? Maybe you bought it from the insurance auction, or you acquired it in some other way after some accident. Why was the such cost, such price identified, predetermined? Well, thank you for the question. It's really true that I bought this car at the auction, and I was assisted by some mediator in the acquisition of the car, and I was looking for an e-car. E-car, okay. Yes, it's fully e-car. It's Chevrolet Bolt, not Volt, but Bolt. And this is the car which I bought in agreement with my wife. We were looking for an e-car only, with the mediation of the person who actually participates in the Mannheim auction, because it's a closed auction. You need to be registered in a way for participation in the auction. So using the services of this mediator, we found this car. If I'm not mistaken, it was $13,000 or $14,000, which was the starting price of the car. I agreed to participation in this auction, and he showed it online to me. I saw he actually made a bid, and there was no other bid, and that's why it was actually the starting price that I had to pay. I had to pay $500 to the auction for the participation, and that was it. And together with all the costs that were related to insurance, delivery, registration in Ukraine, and I got this car about 3 months later. You can check it by the date of its registration in Ukraine. So with all those costs together, the cost of the car was more than $17,000, about $18,000. Okay, it's clear. We had to make all the necessary payments. It's okay that you have indicated, clarified that this is Bolt and not Volt, because really these are different things. And now let me clarify it, that we have 82 Bolt cars of the 2017 year of make, and the cheapest is 16 something, and the most expensive 27,000 and something. So actually, you are within that amount. And finally, we have had some communication with your colleagues who also participate in our selection in relation to some aspects of the means of more effective identification of integrity cases or lack of integrity. and provocative bribery.
Як кримінальне
We discussed
покарання,
this
щоб воно
issue,
мало свої
and
наслідки, а
of course
саме
it cannot be a
висновок
criminal
щодо доброчесності.
a case for criminal
Тобто
punishment,
спроба
but
провокації,
it
яка
could be a
документувала.
case
Скажіть, на вашу
when you
думку,
could
чи є застосованим і
make a
корисним
judgment
це
about
в
lack of
нинішній
integrity when
ситуації?
there is a
Чи
provocative
може
attempt to
це
give a bribe?
взагалі бути
Could this
способом
thing
перевірки
be used? Could this
судді,
be a means
на
to
доброчесність?
check whether the judge is a man of
То,
integrity or
якщо
not?
ви
And who,
згодні з таким,
if you agree with
способом
this
перевірки,
way of
то мав би
checking,
його
who
здійснювати?
should
І чи не
be,
буде це
who would be
тиском
supposed to make
на
this
суд
attempt, and
додатковим,
wouldn't it
на
be
суд в широкому
an
контексті, не на
attempt to
окремий
exert
вид?
pressure on
Ось таке
court in
комплексне
general, not on
питання.
a specific
Спробуйте,
judge? I
якщо
know
треба,
that the
я
question is rather
розповім
comprehensive.
окремі
Try to
аспекти.
give the answer,
Поясніть,
and if
будь
it's
ласка.
necessary, I will try to explain it once again what I mean. Well, thank you for the question. I don't think that bribery provocation should be used as an attempt to check integrity of judges. Why? Because there are much more efficient mechanisms. To be more specific, you can be checking integrity by modeling some situations, and the response of the person is checked to certain circumstances. If we speak about provocative bribery, it's closer to a crime. I don't think that we should resort to actions like that, because these actions could further be treated as a criminal act, and they could cast doubt on the legality, legitimacy of this procedure of integrity check. I think that it's better to have the integrity check on the basis of modeled, simulated situations when you create certain circumstances that do not actually make a person commit a crime, or do not make a person take illegal actions, and do not urge a person to show illegal behavior, but they identify the attitude of a person to some specific circumstances. Thank you. Let me give the floor to our chairperson, Ivan. Thank you.
Пане Сергію,
Serhii.
власне, в тому чи іншому контексті це питання вам ставили.
You have already been
члени
asked this
комісії,
question
воно
in some
прозвучить
specific
трошки як
context, and maybe
повторення.
it will be a kind
Але
of
все ж я від
repetition,
себе
but
хочу його теж
anyway, I
задати.
still want to ask this question.
Я не знаю вас особисто,
I
мені
don't
здається, ви
know
класний
you
детектив.
personally. It seems to me that you are a good detective.
Як класний детектив
How can
може
a
стати
good
класним
detective
членом
become a
Вищої
good member
кваліфікаційної
of the
комісії?
HQCJ?
Бо замислюючись над
Because
цим,
you know, when
я
I
суддя,
start thinking
наприклад.
about that, suppose I'm a
Якщо
judge,
буде
right?
оголошений
And
конкурс
if there
до
is
НАБУ,
a competition, a selection announced to the detective unit of NABU, I think I will not be
Я нічого в цьому не
hired, because I don't have a clear idea about the work of this unit.
Якщо я буду проходити
And
співбесіду,
if
ну
I
якби я буду
go to
там
the
якісь
interview,
загальні свої
well, I
знання там
will
з телесеріалів, там ще з
say
чогось,
some truisms,
я
some
буду розказувати, як
platitudes. I
працюють
will
слідчі.
tell something I know from
Але,
some
по факту,
criminal
я
series,
якби не думаю.
how investigators
А
work. But in
от
fact,
в
I'm
вашому
not
випадку
knowledgeable.
трошки
In your
зворотна така
case,
ситуація.
the
Все, що-
situation is
як
just
ви
the
бачите
reverse.
оцей
So,
перехід? В
how do
чому
you
ви
see
його
this
бачите?
transition? How could this transition be possible? Well, thank you for the question. First of all, I can really be effective in my activity, but at the same time, I've got some ideas and some achievements which I probably did not highlight in any publications, but I have some ideas on the improvement of the work of the HQCJ. And one of the major achievements is the experience which I got in the Bureau and the experience of developing proper and adequate census for integrity cherishing. I think that this is the most important thing a member of the HQCJ should create, because it is the member of the HQCJ who is selecting people who are like him or even better than him. And besides that, I have a number of suggestions concerning improvement of the work of the judiciary in general. Though, to tell the truth, and listening to some speeches of candidates, I will not be very much unique and special, because almost all the suggestions of mine have been voiced already, and I have already told you about some of them. I think that the priority in the work of the High Qualification Commission should go to its inclusion of people representing different fields of activity, because even the experience of our bureau shows that everyone who is a good expert in his field can bring in this contribution, can bring in those good things into the work of the body as the whole. So as a result, I think that what has been achieved by a person in a different field and will be made a contribution into the work of the HQCJ will contribute to the overall positive result of the work of the HQCJ. For example, without breaking the whole procedure or without introducing the changes into the law on the status of judges and then the judiciary as far as selection procedure is concerned, we could still make some changes in the questionnaires for candidates. I mean, we could develop the questionnaire. It's just an example. We could develop the questionnaire like we have the questionnaires for visas in some countries. And this could be the questionnaire, which could even include some questions about the vision of the future work. And then you could compare this vision with the future activity of this judge. Okay, but we have deviated a little bit from this question, so here is the next question.
Я думаю, ви не проти, щоб
I think that you don't
судові
actually
системи
mind
працювали
that we have the best of the best professionals in the judiciary. I mean that the best specialists become judges. Of course, I don't. I don't mind.
Уявімо собі
And
кандидата,
let's imagine a
якому
candidate
нехай буде 35
who
років.
is 35 years
У нього є
old.
певний
He's got
професійний
some
стаж, і так далі, і так
professional
далі. І він
work
обирає.
record,
Йому
and
шукати роботу в приватному
he's choosing
бізнесі,
whether
піти на роботу
to go
в юридичну
to
фірму,
the private sector,
чи йти
to a law
працювати
firm,
суддею.
or to go to the judicial
Значить, працюючи
position.
суддею, він
While
отримує
working as a judge,
моніторинг
he will
способу
get
життя,
monitoring of his way of
перевірка на
living,
доброчесність,
integrity check,
періодичні перевірки з
regular
застосуванням поліграфа.
inspections using
Підвищення
polygraph,
кваліфікації.
qualification
А це я
assessment,
тільки враховую
advanced
те, що у
training.
вас
And I'm just
мотиваційному
enumerating what you have mentioned in
Увага
your motivation
громадськості,
letter. Attention,
необхідність
scrupulous attention from the
заповнювати,
public, the need to
мені здається, 7
fill
декларацій.
7 declarations, if I'm not
Ну і ще
mistaken.
там якісь є.
And,
І
well,
так
there are some
далі, і
other
так
things,
далі,
and
і
so
так
on and so
далі.
forth.
В юридичній фірмі
In the law
йому просто
firm,
треба
well,
працювати.
he will just have to work.
Як ви переконаєте такого
will you
кандидата,
persuade
припустимо, що він
this
там,
candidate?
дуже професійний,
Suppose he is a
немає
very
проблем
good
з
professional and he has
доброчесністю,
no
все окей.
problems with
Там,
integrity,
ми всі
everything is
хотіли,
fine.
щоб цей кандидат
We
став
would
суддею.
all like
Як
this
ви його
candidate to
переконаєте
become a
долучитися
judge.
саме
So
до
how will you
суддівського
persuade him to join in the
з оцім
judiciary
усім, якби,
with all this
тим, що
burden?
відбувається? І не забуваючи ще й про, ну, уявімо,
And
припустимо, рівень
let's
зарплати є
assume that the
конкурентним.
salary is rather
скажімо, там,
competitive, right?
юридична фірма і,
Like in the law firm and in the
припустимо, це перша
judiciary, he
інстанція,
will
ну,
have
приблизно,
the
якби,
almost
уявімо,
the
що
same
зарплата є
salary.
приблизно одна.
Let's imagine
От як ви
that this is the case.
мотивуєте
So how
такого
will you
кандидата,
motivate this candidate
саме подати
to
заяву до
apply
ВККС?
for the HQCJ?
Будь ласка.
Please, the floor is yours. Thank you for the question. Well, first of all, I would tell the candidate that, well, in the law on the judiciary and status of judges, we can see that the judge should, of course, stick to all those restrictions envisaged by the law, but I would tell him that the activity that includes this monitoring of way of living and integrity checks and other elements you have mentioned will not be the one that will constitute a barrier for his main activity, his core activity. And I think that these things should be applied on an optional basis and not just the current regular things available in the work of all judges all the time. I do not quite agree to the fact that judges should all the time submit a package of all those declarations, keep declaring and declaring everything all the time, the things that can anyway be seen from open databases and the state registries. There are also some things that can be happening without the knowledge of the judge and without participation of the judge. This could be integrity check or way of living, checking the way of living. They will not distract the judge from their main activity and will not require his participation, his involvement, and any additional resources or any additional restrictions. That may be happening in parallel. I know the way it was happening when we had selection to the Bureau. No detective is distracted from his main activity. But if it appears that we need to provide some explanations because this monitoring of the way of living identifies some wrong things that need to be explained, then you are distracted from your main job. But otherwise, a lot of procedures are happening in parallel without your participation and even without the notice of the judge or informing of the judge.
Скажіть,
He's informed just
ВККС
de
треба
facto.
швидко
You know, the
набрати
HQCJ should
досить велику
quickly
кількість суддів.
select a large number of judges.
Ті процедури, які зараз є,
But the procedures we
це
currently have in
мінімум рік.
place will last for at least a year.
Я припускаю,
I
що це
assume
буде одним
that
з
This
головних
will be one of the
проблемних
major
питань в роботі
problems
ВККС, тому що
in the work of the
і
HQCJ
суспільство,
because
і
this
держава
society
будуть
and the
вимагати
state will
швидко
demand quick
набрати
actions,
суддів.
quick
Вони
selection of
потрібні тут і
judges
зараз.
because we need
З
judges
іншого
here
боку,
and
є
now.
вимоги закону,
On the other hand,
і з
we have
іншого
the requirements of the
боку, є,
law and
потреба
we have the need
набрати лише
to select only
доброчесних,
good
з
judges who are men of
відповідними
integrity and who have passed
Як ви
all the
прокоментували
integrity
цю
checks.
проблематику? По-перше,
What would be
чи
your
вважаєте
comment
ви
on
це
this problem? Do you
проблематикою?
think
Да,
that
якщо
this is
вважаєте,
a
як би ви
problem?
її
And if yes,
прокоментували?
how would you comment? What would you comment on this? Thank you for your question. I think that this is really a major problem because, as I have mentioned many a time, I go to courts and I know what the load of judges is, in particular in trial courts. And I know statistics that about 30% of judicial positions as of the 31st of December 2022 were not filled. We didn't have judges in those positions. And I think that we should focus, first of all, on selection of judges to the positions, of course, after we analyze the overall situation in the state. So to the positions in the courts where this is absolutely necessary. Besides that, I think that we may introduce a number of procedures that will simplify and accelerate the work of the HQCJ. A number of tasks can also be passed for outsourcing. But the interview with the candidate during the qualification assessment could be conducted in case there is a need to inquire something, to ask something. Not in all the cases it's necessary. I have a number of other suggestions, and I think that we should have the so-called internal audit to get clear what fields will require the immediate work of the HQCJ in order to fill the positions which you currently need badly. And we should also introduce amendments into the regulatory acts on the procedure of selection because we need to simplify and to accelerate the procedure. If there is a need to have 3 or 4 testings, there could be testing with different blocks of items like general skills, knowledge of the law, and integrity questions within one stage. So I think that there is a way out from the situation, even within the restrictions and the norms that are envisaged by the law and the judiciary in the status of judges, because the HQCJ has a rather broad mandate and can actually do a lot. And can do, and a lot of changes can be introduced within this body. Thank you, colleagues. Are there any further questions? No.
Пане Сергію, наша
So,
співбесіда
Serhii, our
наближається
interview is about to
до
finish.
завершення. Будь ласка,
And
підсумуйте,
please,
і,
I would ask you
можливо,
now to
ви,
conclude
що
it,
хотіли
to wrap it
додатково
up.
сказати,
Maybe you
що
would like to
зосередити
add
нашу
something
увагу,
or
чи
to focus
можливо,
on
через
something.
під час
Maybe you
сесії
have
запитань
not
відповідей.
mentioned
Вам
something
слово,
during the
будь ласка.
Q&A session. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, dear commissioners. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate in the selection to express my views. Well, of course, maybe I didn't have the opportunity to tell you exactly what I thought. But I hope that in the future I will be able to implement all the ideas that I have. I wish that you select the best of the best, that the positions are filled by people who are worthy of selecting the judges for Ukraine. Thank you for your attention, and glory to Ukraine, glory to the armed forces, glory to heroes. Thank you, Serhii. So this concludes your interview. Thank you for the participation. All the best to you. Take care and goodbye. Goodbye.